Have you checked out GLP-1s? Are you losing weight? Or better yet, are you losing fat or losing strength? And is your doctor's standard dose quietly making you worse? So the controversial truth with GLP-1s is the weight loss today is just a smaller dysfunction. People are dropping 20 to 30 pounds fast, but they're losing muscle, they're feeling awful, and ending up weaker than before. So now you've got a lighter body with the same problems. Because the real breakthrough isn't the drug, it's the precision. But what if instead of following a fixed protocol, you treated your body like a system? Dial the dose like a dimmer switch. Reduce appetite just enough, not eliminate it. Create a small, sustainable deficit, not starvation. Suddenly you're not fighting your body, you're collaborating with it. This is software thinking applied to biology. Real-time feedback loops, adaptive dosing, health that behaves more like a product than a prescription. Because in a world where AI outperforms your brain, your competitive edge becomes physical. Energy, clarity, presence. So if your body is the operating system for everything you build, why are you still running it on default settings? Welcome to AI for Founders, I'm Ryan Estes. This is for founders who want to turn health into leverage and learn how precision medicine, peptides, and AI are changing what peak performance actually looks like. If you want an unfair advantage, start with your inbox. If you want signal over noise, you know where to go, aiforfounders.co. It's where builders get sharper. And if this hit, leave a review like you're writing it for the founder you used to be. And if you're ready to turn your story into distribution, go to kitcaster.com. They get founders booked on top podcasts, so your ideas don't just exist, they spread. That's Kitcaster by Moburst. Dr. Ian Ellis, welcome to the show. Thank you so much for joining me.
Yeah, you're so welcome. It's a true privilege to be here. Thank you.
Yeah, I'm really excited about it. One, because we dive deep into kind of medical applications, where we're at, where we're going. And I'm really excited to talk to you about the opportunity for therapies now, what the future looks like, and kind of like your role, as an MD, as an entrepreneur, as the founder of VoaFit. We can get into that. And maybe that's a good place to start. Tell me a little bit about voafit.com.
Yeah, so VoaFit is a concierge medical practice, and we specialize in precision dosing of GLP-1 weight loss medications, hormone optimization, and I use that word specifically, not just replacement, but optimization for men and women, as well as the full menu of advanced peptide therapies, kind of this new wave of therapies to optimize your health rather than just manage chronic disease. And so that's what we do. I started it really as a passion project because coming from traditional Western medicine, I was an ER doc full-time for almost 10 years, really steeped in that traditional, mechanism of treating people with traditional medicines and managing their chronic diseases and really getting disillusioned in the ER setting of how we just weren't ever making a difference. It's like we're just bailing out the pool all day, every day, and people just jump right back in, the same people over and over with the same problems, with the same therapies, and never actually getting anywhere, getting across the finish line to actual health. And I've had my own challenges with that, particularly in the area of being overweight or, struggling with kind of having an ideal physique. That's a personal battle I've fought my whole life. And my first exposure to any sort of medicinal help with that was when I was exposed to semaglutide sometime in 2022. And I was prescribed the standard dose. It was presented to me as, somewhat of a magic bullet in terms of, you just take this powerful new therapy. It, kills your appetite and, you solve the appetite problem that plagues anyone who's been in a calorie deficit for a significant amount of time. And you lose weight and you get where you're trying to go, which of course sounded very attractive. I jumped into that head first because I was tired of spending every waking moment fighting that battle on my own. I mean, anyone who's been on a diet or had struggles with their weight, we know the incredible intensity and focus it takes to get somewhere, to stay there, and then the minute you take your eye off the ball, you end up right back where you started. And so semaglutide was presented as a solution to that. Well, it was and it wasn't. And that is true for millions of people right now because, it was because it did what it was intended to do. It did make my appetite much lower. It did solve the food noise problem. In fact, it, created almost at high doses, which we'll address soon, I'm sure, almost a food aversion. So staying in a calorie deficit was effortless for the first time in my life. But I had tons of side effects. I developed severe gastrointestinal issues, didn't really feel good at all after the first 3-4 weeks of therapy. And 3 months later, got on the scale. I had lost 30 pounds, which was fantastic. I'd been trying off and on to lose that 30 pounds for a long time and not succeeding particularly well. But I got on a body scanner and got my advanced body composition metrics and was absolutely horrified. I'd lost 2-to-1 lean mass to fat mass. My body fat percentage had barely changed, which, for someone who has spent their whole life in the fitness industry, is just a catastrophic outcome. Like, that's not the point. Nobody sets out to lose 30 pounds to be the same body fat percentage and to have lost, 2 out of 3 pounds of muscle mass. Okay. But I could see the promise of these medicines. I could see how there was something to them that was so powerful that we've all been so desperately needing in this Western, world of our food supply and all the environment we live in. But the way it was applied to me, the way it was dosed, the way I was prescribed it, did not have an ideal outcome. And an easy way to say it is it didn't reach its potential. It's like, this is something really important, but this isn't where this needs to take us. As a population, we don't want to end up 30% lighter and 30% weaker. Totally. Okay. And at the same body fat percentage. So I, had my own process of evaluating, investigating, how can we maximize the outcomes of these very special medications? How do we minimize the side effects, maximize the benefits? And I stumbled upon something that I think is really important, which is basically dosing them with precision, based not on a fixed weekly dose, but finding these particular dose and in more precisely, the particular medication level that is ideal for each person. And, that's easy to say. Turns out it's actually quite hard to do, because of the pharmacokinetics of these medicines and how the doses stack on each other. There's a lot of really complex math involved in finding out that right, perfect effect therapeutic level for GLP-1s, but it can be done. And, I built an application to automate that process. We'll talk about that later. But I started my clinic, coming back around full circle, to validate this model that I had innovated of, is it possible to dose these medicines in a way that is precise, that is individualized, that minimizes side effects and maximizes outcomes? I started my clinic to see if that could be done on a clinic-wide and then population-wide basis. And I'm happy to report that it actually can. Our outcomes in our clinic, which we just ran our first little study, retrospective on our outcomes, have been spectacular. And I don't say that as a credit to myself. I say that as a credit to this method of dosing and actually taking care of an individual patient, realizing that it is not one size fits all for these therapies. Well, what are the top line outcomes? Our patients lose weight faster than the trials on half the medicine and with zero desistance rate due to side effects, which is absolutely huge. I mean, that is the red light flashing siren in the world right now with GLP-1s, is we just can't keep people on them. 50, 60, 70% desistance rates due to either side effects or cost or both. And of course, those two are related, because the higher your dose, the more medicine you take, the more expensive it is, and the more the risk of side effects. So if you can crack that code of how do we have the lowest effective dose and not a milligram more on a population-wide basis, then we can get somewhere. We can maximize the incredible benefit of these medicines and keep people on them that need to be on them, and hopefully successfully taper off people that don't need them anymore. But that also takes precision. Stopping cold turkey at a super high dose is an absolute guarantee of weight rebound, of being right back where you started, or even worse off if you've lost the muscle mass and had a bad outcome. So that's kind of where I come from, my perspective. My obsession is how do we optimize these therapies with precision to make them really work and reach their potential.
This episode is brought to you by a dangerous idea. It's called reading, specifically the AI for Founders newsletter. 47,000 founders strong now, and it's the good stuff. No top 10 AI tools that will change your life written by someone who doesn't ship product. It's just real breakdowns of what's actually working in AI. Who's raised, who failed, who pivoted, and which founders quietly built $1 million in ARR while everyone else was arguing on X. It's written for people building with AI. Every week you get tactical frameworks, unfair advantages, breakdowns of real companies, and the occasional existential question about whether your startup is intelligent or just well-branded. It's free, it's sharp, it might mildly offend your current workflow. Go to aiforfounders.co and subscribe before your competitor does. Because the only thing worse than being replaced by AI is being replaced by a founder who reads. That's the newsletter at aiforfounders.co. Now back to the show. Incredible. So it's really the tip of the spear largely on personalized dosage, tracking, and medications. And I'll tell you why I'm always so excited to talk to you. Because anecdotally, what's always been important to me is human flourishing. And ultimately, I feel like, I was never really attracted to the medical industry because it's like, I don't want to go to the doctor and get a physical. I'm good. So where I invested my time was personal training, gyms, nutritionists, acupuncture, massage, cupping. I like the singing bowls.
Yep.
There's all these kind of alternative therapies that I always like because it's treatments for the well. So of course, if people have some kind of chronic pathology, it's like, GLP-1s or hormone optimization or the new frontier of peptides. It's like, yes, treat that. That's the baseline. Let's get you back to the baseline. And I feel like I've been fortunate enough to really kind of be in good shape my entire life. And, my baseline has always been maintained, but I want to push the border of how good can I get? How good can I feel? And largely this domain, I think by Western medicine was seen as well, we can't really treat that because without a diagnosis, then what is there to treat? But we're kind of getting beyond that now. So we have the promise of therapies now that not only are gonna have treatments for, our chronic illnesses, but also it's going to inspire people to take a step further and to kind of build a bridge to the audience. We were talking about this before we hit record. That, fitness has always been very important to the leaders that we admire. And maybe the last 20 or 30 years in kind of startups or business or entrepreneurship, we always look to the smartest guy in the room, And now intelligence is free for everybody. And over the last couple of months, I've noticed AI is definitely smarter than me. I mean, I knew it knew more than me for sure, but now the cognitive power is getting to the point where probably it's smarter than any human on earth, and this is just the beginning. So kind of where does that leave us as founders? If our status in the tribe is dependent on fitness, and prior it was some kind of intellectual fitness, now more than ever, it's going to be our physical fitness. This is something that Hollywood has known forever. This is something that fashion has known forever. That actually we admire people that are super fit, so you see that now. You look at the transformation of Zuckerberg, he's shredded. You look at the transformation of Bezos, he's shredded. Yep. Elon is still a giant white whale, but that's Elon. But the point is where are people spending their time and attention? Of course, it's within their meat bodies. Because not only do you feel better, you can perform better, but also from a leadership perspective, people look up and admire those kind of people. So I think this the clinic that you're working with and the technology you're providing is going to provide a huge value for leadership across the board.
Well, so here's what came to mind when you said that. Being fit used to be a real accomplishment. Okay. It took, I always say there's two groups in the world, and this is obviously flattening it beyond what's truly accurate. But generally speaking, there's two groups in the world. There's the 75% of the country that is overweight or obese because they're busy doing other stuff that's more important to them.
And pizza's delicious.
And pizza is delicious, and enjoying food is a valuable thing. Eating enjoyable food, enjoying vacations, enjoying, fellowship is a really critical part of human flourishing. Okay. So that's not necessarily, it's ideally you have both, right? But turns out before some of these therapies that lower the barrier to entry in our Western world with our poor diet and our poor habits and our poor sleep and the structures our society has set up, it's extraordinarily difficult to be fit. Okay, so then you have the 20% or 15% that aren't overweight or obese, and many of those people, and this is where I put myself in this category for most of my life, have sacrificed everything to achieve that. Okay, you spend 24 hours a day thinking about what you're eating. You spend hours a week meal prepping your meals. You spend 3 hours a day burning off that extra, donuts you happen to eat because you fell off the wagon for a day and you're not willing to let that pack on. You don't go on vacations because there's too much food and temptation. You stop going to social events because there's going to be pizza and M&Ms there. And it's really hard to say no when you're in a calorie deficit, right? So you end up sacrificing the good on this side in the pursuit of a greater good, or at least an equal good in your mind on this side. Well, I would very strongly posit that neither of those are acceptable. You have to find a way to be balanced, to enjoy life, to be able to have that meal when it's a special occasion and not have it, stack up and ruin your health, but also be able to do that every now and again and, and still be fit. Okay, we have to find a way to not have to choose. And, that's what these therapies offer, is it lowers the barrier to entry, both in terms of, how hard it is to do, adjusting your set point where your body is driving you to a healthier place. That's a lot of the things that these peptide therapies do. And on the AI intelligence side, having access to unbelievable resources at the click of a finger, where you don't have to pay, $200 an hour for a top-tier personal trainer to get access to the knowledge, to the way to do that. Okay, that's where I truly believe that. You go back 100 years, for example. What did people, before the Industrial Revolution, before the industrial food supply, before the modern world existed, okay? Well, what did that look like? People spent huge amounts of their day doing physical labor, expending enormous amounts of calories to do work, much of it to actually grow, prepare, catch, make your food. And then it made sense to eat when you were hungry because you were in a calorie deficit because of all the freaking work you were doing all day. And you were just replenishing what your body needed. You didn't have processed food supply, so you ate real food in the amounts that your body needed. And heck yeah, you needed it because you got to get up at 5 o'clock the next morning until the fields the next day. Okay, the average weight of the American male in 1920 was 165 pounds. Like, being overweight or obese was an anomaly. And, type 2 diabetes did not exist as a condition. Well, in 100 years, literally 100 years, that environment has completely changed. Yeah. We don't have to move. We don't have to expend any energy whatsoever in our daily activities to get through the day. And when you reach for food, it's easier and it's more accessible to grab something processed, energy dense, hyper palatable. And, that environment where food is omnipresent and you don't have to work for it is, of course, a setup for a population being overweight or obese. Well, that ship has sailed. We're never going back to the pre-industrial age. So we have to find a way to exist in the modern world where you don't have to mortgage your whole life in the pursuit of fitness so that you can achieve that holistic human flourishing. And that's the promise of these medicines, is they make that possible for anyone. GLP-1s make arriving at a healthy weight possible for literally anyone, with few exceptions. Peptide therapies to adjust your set point for muscle mass and for your, to help optimize your metabolism, optimize your hormones. Incredibly powerful, effective therapies. But what is the barrier now? It's cost, it's access, and it's specific knowledge of how much of this powerful compound do I take to get the outcome I want without tipping over into side effects, right? Yeah. And that is the slice where I'm living right now is, okay, we have all of this access to things that democratize the pursuit of fitness and health, but how can we do it and get where we want to go without harming ourselves? How can we lose that 30 pounds and have it be 25 of fat and 5 of lean mass, not the other way around, right? Well, there's a lot of specific answers to that, but that's my specific area of interest, is making these therapies actionable for everyone.
Incredible. And I love that idea of the cultural relevance of why it's challenging to live in calorie surplus everywhere. There's cheese danishes everywhere, but if you go way back, and I mean way back, there's evolutionary incentives to eat all the possible food you can. So when we were just scurrying lizards and we had that lizard brain, everything was telling us eat as much as you possibly can whenever you ever have the opportunity, because you get to reproduce. Now we evolved a little bit, and have like not only the lizard brain that we still share with the lizard that's very loud, but we have the cerebral cortex. So let's say like we became mammals and we learned that there's also evolutionary incentives to share a little bit of that food with your partner, with your buddies, and with your kids. You're like, I want to make sure that I can do all these things. So we kind of picked up those attributes, but we still have the lizard brain in us that's like, let's eat everything we can whenever we can. And there's this famous experiment. It's a great video from the 50s. And there's a couple of kids, and they put them in a room, and they put 2 marshmallows on the table. They're like, okay, if you can wait 60 seconds, I'm going to leave the room. If you can wait 60 seconds, I'll give you 2 more marshmallows. And so they leave the room, and you see these kids just like eyeballing these marshmallows, just like losing their mind, trying to wrestle between lizard brain and cerebral cortex of like, if I wait, I can have more. And they're like, no, every single kid ate both marshmallows because that lizard brain is still in us. So, go ahead, please.
No, I was just going to say, we severely overestimate the power of our frontal cortex and severely underestimate the power of that quote unquote lizard brain. Physiologic drives are inevitable. Eventually, you can control them for a while, you can push back on them for a while, but they typically, in the end, win out because they are a biological imperative. Okay, now that imperative can be perverted. It can be applied in a way in an environment where it's not designed to handle the things that are around it, and so it's not controlled or it's not beneficial. But something I frequently describe to patients is, look, appetite, if it is uncontrolled, if you have a very heightened physiologic drive to eat, which is omnipresent in our culture, and it's because of lots of things. But if you have that, trainers will say, yeah, just don't eat. Just have willpower, have self-control, fill up on, things with bulk and just, well, it doesn't work. Okay, because that physiologic drive is present. It's just like saying to someone, don't go to sleep. Well, it's actually really analogous to dieting. Don't go to sleep. Well, I can stay up all night for a night, just like you can diet from Monday to Tuesday. Well, Tuesday to Wednesday, it's really hard. You're blasting the music, you're slapping your cheeks, you got the windows down in the car and cold air blasting, you're doing everything you can, right? Well, day 3, you're going to be falling asleep standing up. Okay, that drive will increase in intensity until it becomes an inevitability. That is true, statistically speaking, with diet and appetite. Okay, you have to solve the appetite problem. Okay, and you don't have to go back 1,000,000 years to lizards. You go back 100 or 200 years. Okay, we didn't have easy access to food all the time. Yeah, we were perfectly adapted to an environment where you get food occasionally, and when you do, you eat that stuff up to store it away for a rainy day, because that rainy day is like tomorrow. Okay, it used to be that like famine was common, and you'd have a whole summer where you didn't have access to significant amounts of high-calorie food. So it made perfect sense. Dude, bears do this right now, right? They stock up, they store up, they fatten up, and by the end of, that, time when they've used up that, they're not fat anymore. They're lean and mean and hungry, and it's time to do that again, right? Well, humans are the same. Unfortunately, we live in an environment where there's, food everywhere all the time, and we don't have to expend any energy for it. So again, the point is we have to deal with the problem. Okay, the appetite problem is real. It has to be solved. And this environment we're in is not changing or going away in any meaningful way. So we have to find a way to adapt, to live within it, to find that balance where we can be healthy and flourishing in our lives. And precision application of these amazing therapies is the way to get there. In conjunction, of course, with, great lifestyle advice, with a great exercise routine, with focusing, being free from dedicating your life to solving the food quantity issue, now you can take some of that energy and focus on food quality. Yes, make sure the food the food you do eat is high in nutrition, is natural, is minimally processed, preferably prepared yourself. But, that's not reality for most people. So we have to find a way to live our lives in a way that that makes sense, that doesn't take, so much effort to get somewhere where you need to be. And these therapies make that possible, but only if you apply them precisely.
Yeah. It's just interesting to see that like humans dealt with scarcity for so long, and that's a terrible problem. But we get into absolute abundance, and we find out that that's a big problem too. But now, through this incredible treatment, like we can overcome that. So now it becomes on like, how do I optimize the dose, which you're working on as far as like, taking tabs on like how you feel, when do you feel the best, what side effects are you feeling, because there's going to be gastrointestinal, issues potentially, like you mentioned, that you kind of struggled with. But also aside from the medication, now that you are kind of entering calorie deficit, you don't have what they talk about food noise, which is another word for appetite, or is it different? I'd love to know that. But also now the decisions you're making on what you can eat are really important, So I've had a lot of buddies that were vegans, and I'm like, bro, it's not healthy for you if you're just eating potato chips all day long.
Yeah.
Sure, you're vegan, congratulations, but like, the decisions you're making becomes important. So when you're advising clients, you're dropping beneath 1,800, maybe you're getting into 1,600 calories a day. Where do you want to be kind of supplementing? What kind of foods should they really be considering eating during the day?
Yeah, so I'll answer that in a few stages. So first of all, if you have, especially if you use my tool for adjusting your medication dose, but in general, these medicines can function like a dial where you can kind of pick your deficit. How hard are they going to turn down the food noise? Is it to where you still get hungry, but but when you eat, you get full fast? Well, I would say that's like probably a sweet spot. Okay. Do you turn it up to where you don't have any desire to eat at all, where it's painful to eat, where any time you eat, you feel sick? Well, that's obviously not the target. Okay, so that the dose informs the second, because if you don't have the physiologic ability to intake any food, it just becomes very difficult to get enough nutrition. Okay, so getting your dose right to where you still have a drive to eat, you're not food averse, but you get full fast, you still are able to get enough calories in. Well, what do I mean by enough calories? In my opinion, we all know the simple equation, 3,500 calorie deficit, pound of fat. 500 to 750 calories a day of a deficit is plenty. Anything more than that really edges toward excessive and puts you at risk for muscle loss and for undernutrition. And so, first of all, setting those guardrails, saying, look, you don't need to lose 4 pounds this week. Losing a pound consistently over time is way better. Okay, so turning that appetite drive down just a smidge, 500, 750 calories, that's perfect. Okay, well, if you're there and your body is driving you to eat that amount, then again, because you don't have to think about the deficit, your body's doing that on its own in concert with the medicine, then you just focus on the quality. Well, this is how I describe it to my patients. I think nutrition is just so unnecessarily overcomplicated for most people. I try to make it as simple as humanly possible. Protein first, preferably animal protein, unless you have an ethical decision against eating meat. But animal protein is the foundation. Okay, you have to get enough protein to sustain your muscle mass and to have a functioning, strong physique. Okay, that's number one. Once that is satisfied, okay, and if I had to choose between that and any other, food group, I would say start with that first. It's kind of the foundation. Well, after that is plants. Okay, what do I mean by plants? Anything that grows out of the ground that is edible, that is not a concentrated source of starch or carbohydrate energy. Okay, so grains don't count, bread, potatoes, pasta, that whole category, that's, an incredibly important energy source when you need it, but it's very low in nutrition compared to the amount of energy. So fruits, nuts, legumes, those types of things are fantastic for filling out the rest of your plate. Well, animal protein, minimally processed, and as many plants as you can get for that meal. Okay. If you have room and you're still hungry, okay, have some carbohydrates. It's fine. Preferably have those at a time when you actually need them, because all you're doing is ingesting a lot of concentrated energy that needs somewhere to go. And trust me, it's going to go somewhere. It'll either go to fat storage or it will go to fuel your activities. So if you're about to run 6 miles, eat the pasta. Okay, it's going to good use. There's nothing evil about carbohydrates. They just serve a particular function that we don't really need much in our world anymore because we don't exercise unless we're in the gym. Okay.
Is there utility in eating the carbs after the run?
Sure. As long as it's not to excess. Yeah. You have glycogen stores in your liver. There's basically your body has a reserve of carbohydrates that it takes from, but it doesn't have to be a lot because let's face it, unless you're running a marathon, you're not depleting those stores significantly. If you burn 200 calories of, energy in a workout, if you get 200 in advance, great. If you didn't, have 200 at the end. No big deal. But it's just matching what the food does to the energy cost. So, animal protein and plants, they have unbelievably important amounts of nutrition, and you don't have to spend a lot of your caloric allowance for those things. Now, here's the problem. When you're on a GLP-1 and your appetite is suppressed, if you start with the carbohydrates and you fill up and your appetite drive is satisfied by that low nutrition, high density food, you will never get to the plants and the protein. You're not going to do it. And people that have not been on a GLP-1 don't understand. Okay. It's almost analogous, and I use this very loosely because it's not the same, but it's similar. A cancer patient where you're like, they're losing weight rapidly and you say, just eat. They're like, I can't. I look at food and I feel sick. I feel nauseous. I have an aversion to that. I put it in my mouth and I can't swallow it. Okay. You don't want to be in that situation on a GLP-1, but if you're even close to that, okay, or if that's a point that you get to after you eat, you have to start with the protein. You have to get to the plant second and then the carbs third. So, if you follow those very simple rules, don't overdose, get your protein in first, fill up on plants, and eat carbohydrates when you need them for exercise, you will do freaking great. Like, it doesn't have to be any more complicated than that. My patients are very successful using that very basic metric because you don't have to fight the appetite battle. It's just like the quality of what you're eating. Are you making every bite count? If that makes sense.
I love it. And let's get a little bit more specific because you're a doctor, you're an entrepreneur, you're super jacked. Like, what does your optimal day look like for a workout? And then what are you eating during the day? And when, at what times?
Great question. So, it's funny. I'll start with workouts. You
start in the morning. Are you a first thing in the morning workout guy?
It depends. That's actually my preference. Unfortunately, my gym space is in my home and it shares a wall with some of my young kids. And so I tried that for about a year of trying to tiptoe around the gym and not make any noise that I was lifting, and it just didn't work very well. So I tend to work out mid-morning, just kind of after the kids have left for school. I personally try to work out 6 days a week. That is not necessary for most people by any stretch. But to me, it's the only way to achieve both goals that I want for my physique, which is I want focused strength training, which is very different from hypertrophy training. So I have 3 days that are longer workouts, much lower intensity in terms of, how many lifts or things like that. But I focus on, traditional strength training, low reps, high weight, never going to failure, just kind of training that upper end of strength. And then that leaves the other days to work on more traditional bodybuilding style hypertrophy workouts. I am so split in this. I love to work out, but I can't do it on my own. It's this weird thing. Like if I'm working out with someone, it is the most fun activity I can imagine. And if my workout partner doesn't show up, I won't do it. Because there are other things that are more pressing. So I personally need real accountability for that. And so, I have a trainer for 3 days out of the week, and I have my best friend that I've been working out with a long time for the other 3 days. And as long as those pieces fit together, I try to fit in between 4 and 6 days per week, some strength training, some hypertrophy training, and usually about an hour each time, give or take.
Amazing.
That's kind of just what grounds me. Like, I feel so much better in the rest of my day if I get that in. But, I just want to make clear to anyone who's listening, you do not need to work out 6 days a week to have a really great and strong physique. I mean, each major muscle group once per week is plenty. If you can hit them twice per week, great. But you can do your secondary workout being a full body, just touching all those muscles one more time, and that's usually more than sufficient. So I don't overdo the cardio. I do 15 minutes of intervals a couple times a week on a good week, and that's enough to maintain cardiovascular health without kind of eating into my strength.
That's what all bodybuilders say. 15 minutes of cardio, we're good to go.
Yeah. But weight training, when you're doing it with proper intensity, is cardiovascular exercise to an extent.
100%. Tell me about your ideal day with the fork and spoon.
Yeah. So my maintenance calories are around 2,600, 2,700, sometimes a little bit more, depending on how much cardiovascular activity I do. I have to say, let's describe it this way. There's a triangle in life, and you only get two. Okay, there's cost, there's convenience, and there's quality. Okay, it's true in life, it's true in business, it's true in food. Okay, you can't have things that are low cost and convenient and high quality. That does not exist. So I tell all of my patients, and I tell myself too, you have to choose. Okay, and for the decision for everyone, really, I have found, comes down to the budget piece. Okay, if you can't afford convenient, high quality food, you have to make it yourself. That's the answer. You have to. You can't have convenience and high quality and not expend a lot of money for it. Okay, so for me, better for worse, I have a decent enough income that for me, my choice is convenience and quality. So most of what I eat is meal prep, delivery services. So my favorite is Snap Kitchen, but I've used Factor Meals and a lot of different things. My fridge is stacked up with them. I have a very significant variety of what those things are. I try to have some, in a perfect day, I'll have some chicken, I'll have some red meat, and I'll have some fish. And all of those have vegetables within them. And then I top it off to make sure I hit my protein goals with, a couple premier protein shakes from Costco. Added on to those are, because those meal, delivery services all include vegetables. I don't really have to add too many veggies on top of that. I certainly eat a lot of fruit. I eat a lot of yogurt, things that are kind of easy to grab because they are convenient. And somewhere around 2,800 calories, 200 grams of protein. I don't really count the carbs. I just make sure that I get the protein and plants in and just eat enough to maintain my weight. So that's probably not a very satisfying answer because, unfortunately, it's that or I take the time to make my own, and I just don't have the time. Yeah. So now, but I try to encourage people to be realistic. I think people have this pipe dream that somehow you can find a way to get convenient, cheap, high quality food, and it's not possible. So you have to choose, am I going to pay a lot of money and have someone do the work, or am I going to get it for cheap from the store, from Costco? But then you got to make it yourself.
I'm the sucker that pays a lot and cooks it. It gets the high quality. There's no convenience, except once it's done. I am a big meal prepper, and meal prepping, the Sunday meal prep for the family is one thing, but also like if you do like spend, I'll do like a, if I'm cooking ribeyes, throw an extra one on the grill, and then you can eat that tomorrow, kind of thing. Amazing.
Yeah. And I've done all those permutations throughout the years. I think where a lot of people, the trap most people fall into is they try to have convenience and cost, and that results in low quality. Yeah. That's where you grab things and you end up with a diet where you're eating 70% of your food out of wrappers, or that you can buy at the convenience store. Or, I've seen these videos on YouTube where people are like, "Oh my gosh, groceries are so expensive," and they lay out what they ate, or they bought from the grocery store, and none of it's food. Like none of it. It's like, oh my gosh, okay, there's chips and there's noodle, ready packed noodles, and then there's X, Y, and Z processed food, and you look at the whole pile and you're like, well, there's not any food in that. And that's the trap. Like, you can't have a healthy physique with low cost and high convenience. So it's either going to be inconvenient and expensive, okay? Or no, sorry, convenient or expensive, or it's going to be inconvenient and it can be cheap. But, coming to terms with that reality, I think, is important for people, because it's just not possible to have all three.
Totally. Love it. Okay, give me the download on peptides. Peptides right now seem to be like this miracle drug, but it's all kind of shrouded in mystery. So what are peptides, and what are some of the applications people can expect coming down the pipe?
Yeah. So, peptides, it's such a funny conversation. And I myself was very ignorant to this whole area of medicine, even as, 5 years ago. When I was working in the ER, I didn't know anything about peptides, and neither did any doctors that I worked with. And it was just kind of something that Jim Bros talked about. Okay. Well, and people would ask me, hey, what do you think about peptides? And I would kind of like just throw the baby out with the bathwater and say, well, I think they're just kind of like not ready for prime time. We don't have a lot of human studies. We don't know what they do. So I'm not really comfortable kind of just wading into that space, or really, considering them as an option. Okay. Well, that whole worldview fell apart after I took a GLP-1. And when I realized that GLP-1s are peptides. Yeah. And I could see how amazingly impactful and important they were. And then I was doing research, and I had the realization, which again, in hindsight, it's like, how did I not realize this? But insulin is a peptide. Okay. Insulin was the first peptide synthesized, stable enough in solution to use in humans. Well, once you go, wait a minute. So insulin, incredibly important drug, and GLP-1s, incredibly important drugs, are peptides. Then it forces you to be like, this is not a class discussion. This is not, hey, peptides as a class aren't useful. It's now I have to actually consider each one, because peptides, all a peptide is a method of transmitting information within the body. It's a string of amino acids. It's a little bitty protein that is like a very specific key that fits into a very specific lock to transmit specific information in the body. That's all a peptide is. Well, the reason peptides are somewhat novel has nothing to do with whether they're effective or not. It has to do with just basic pharmacology. It's really hard to keep them stable in solution long enough to actually keep them in a vial to administer to people. Because if you synthesize a peptide, but it dissolves within 30 seconds, you can run a trial on that, but you can't treat anyone in real life. Well, in the past 20 years, pharmacology has advanced to the point where they can keep these things in solution for weeks or even months at a time. And now all of a sudden, that class of therapeutics is available for people to use. Well, it turns out it's actually probably the most important way that the body communicates information. And if you can enter that pathway, you can do a lot of amazing things, because that's how your body is naturally functioning. And now you're saying, I'm going to, put a little bit more of that, a little stronger signal in that physiologic pathway to make a difference there. And the field of peptides has exploded. I mean, every day there's another peptide out there people are talking about. And the challenge is the field is moving so fast, it's very difficult to get a robust data set of actual evidence to support it. And, this is just the reality of big pharma. For those big, giant studies that cost millions and millions, potentially billions of dollars to make happen, it has to be a patentable molecule. And a lot of these peptides aren't patentable. So there's no commercial incentive to get those studies done. That's actually where I hope to inject myself into this process, is because our app is designed not just for GLP-1 administration, but basically a way to standardize and track and get data from people that are taking their own regimens on their own time, and collecting data, collecting real-time, symptoms, progress, biometrics, all of those things is almost like a telemetry system for, optimization medicine. And hopefully, if we get in the hands of enough people, we can get a robust enough data set, and hopefully even in some IRB, fully fledged sanctioned studies, to really get the data set we need to bring these things out of the quote unquote shadows and make them big boy medicines, because that's what I always say is like, okay, so GLP-1s, they now have several New England Journal of Medicine studies. Well, they're not peptides anymore. They graduated. They're big boy medicines. Okay, insulin, big boy medicine. Well, Peptides as a class, there are some big boy medicines in there. I guarantee you that. We just need to figure out which ones they are and which ones really are a good thought, interesting, but just don't work.
Yeah.
And so that's where the field is right now.
It's depressing that our system is so financially motivated that these therapies that could be absolute game changers aren't incentivized because you can't make a buck off it. But I won't go there. Should people be worried or concerned about peptides? Is there any kind of risk associated with them?
Yeah. Well, it depends.
Yeah.
Which peptide, right?
Yeah.
All interventions have risk. So I would say as a class of medicines, peptides, because they work within body's natural pathways, how your body naturally transmits information. It's not a chemical key fitting into a biological lock it wasn't intended for, like some small molecule medicines are. As a class, they tend to be very safe because those very specific keys only fit into one lock. Okay, side effects many times come from chemical medicines, something binding to something it wasn't intended to. Okay, and having an untoward or undesirable effect. With peptides, they only bind to one thing. So it's somewhat predictable what their side effect profile might be. Okay, the GLP-1 drugs bind to the GLP-1 receptor. Well, what does that receptor do? It suppresses appetite and it slows gastric emptying. So what is the side effect profile? If you overdo it, your stomach stops
too much weight.
working and you stop eating. Okay, that's a predictable effect. Just like insulin. It does one thing. It takes sugar from outside the cell into the cell. If you overdose on insulin, what happens? Your blood sugar gets too low. It's very predictable. So there's not a lot of surprising or out of that physiologic pathway side effects with peptides. So if you understand the pathway and you understand what it does, then you have a good sense on the safety profile, which is helpful. Now, in general, this is my caution for peptides. Don't take peptides if you don't have a problem you're trying to solve. Okay? There is some degree of risk, and it is indeterminate for a lot of them. So, only try a peptide if there's something wrong that you're trying to fix. Don't biohack just for the sake of the privilege of trying this or that. It's like,
what if the problem is I don't look as good as I want to look? Is that a problem? Is that a legitimate problem?
It is.
Yeah.
It is. And the reason for that is because people that look good are generally healthier. What does it mean to look good? Well, you brought in evolution before. We were evolutionarily driven to perceive health as attractive. Okay? And I'll actually give you a great example I've been thinking about the last couple of weeks because I saw a study on it. Ripped bodybuilders that are 2-3% body fat. Okay? Sure, they're attractive to each other and they're attractive in the mirror to themselves. But as on a population level, most females do not find ripped to pieces bodybuilders attractive as a class. That's been demonstrated many times. And if you're a gym bro, you know exactly what I'm talking about. Okay? They go, ew, gross. All right? Well, there was a study that basically anonymized all these physiques and combined them into basically a prototypical physique at like 5, 10, 15, 20, 25%. 15% body fat was by far the leader for most attractive. Well, what does 15% body fat mean? It means you're strong, you're capable, and you're not carrying so much excess weight that you can't do important things. You may not have a visible ripped six-pack, but you sure have a six-pack under there, and you're capable to use it, okay?
You can tie your shoes.
Exactly, right? So function typically equals attractiveness. Okay, that's how we're wired. And I use that to encourage people to say, don't shoot for 6 to 8% body fat all the time. It's not actually optimal. Okay? Shoot for health. Well, health is usually in that 10 to, 15, 16% ratio where you're strong, but you have enough reserve. If something happens, like for example, if a bodybuilder that's 3% body fat gets sick, what reserve do they have to pull from to get through that illness? They don't have any fat reserves, so they have to pull it for muscle. Okay, well, that's not functional. Okay, so I say that to say, yes, being attractive or looking good is a valuable goal insofar as it relates to health.
Yeah.
Okay, that's what I try to have all my patients go. If you're healthy, you're gonna look good. Don't use aesthetics as the driver. Focus on health, focus on physiologic optimization, and you will look great.
Absolutely.
Okay.
And we are tribal creatures. And like kind of we were talking about before, status in the tribe is important. And
Mhm.
health and fitness, physiological, fitness is an important status marker, in any kind of tribal situation.
The problem is our culture has really perverted what actual health looks like. Okay, when you get on Instagram and you see, these physiques that have nothing in common with what is actually naturally humanly possible, and you start to associate that with normal and that being the goal, it's just so unhealthy mentally. Because you're shooting for something that you cannot possibly achieve no matter what. Even if you're the healthiest person in the world and did everything right, you still couldn't look like that. Well, that's when you have to use chemical or performance enhancing drugs to get there. I would say let's use those agents safely to get to a place of optimal health, not some ideal that has nothing in common with real health. So I don't know if that makes sense, but I think peptides can help tremendously with getting there. In terms of specifics, you said, well, I want to look good. Well, what does that mean? A low body fat percentage, or at least an average body fat percentage. That's GLP-1s all day. That's a peptide. Maintaining your muscle mass. Well, HGH secretagogues like tesamorelin, like CJC1295, that whole class of medicines is incredibly effective at preventing muscle loss during the weight loss period. Optimizing your hormones. Testosterone in males, incredibly important hormone. It does real important work. And if your testosterone is suboptimal, it's like, running a Porsche on, two-stroke engine gas. It might move, but it's going to smoke. It's going to rattle. It's not going to, move when you push the accelerator well. So, getting your testosterone optimized is like kind of running on the octane of gas you're supposed to be. It allows you to reach your potential. So, yeah, these therapies are incredibly important. They are so effective, but they have to be done well and right in the right doses and applied to the right person. And that's where you need a combination. Smart providers, affordable access to the therapies, and a means of prescribing those things in a way that patients can understand.
Incredible. A couple more questions before I let you get out of here. And maybe just a statement first. The irony, that we were talking about our evolutionary lizard brain as being a cause. It just makes us want to eat everything. But ironically, it was the receptors of the Gila monster venom that inspired GLP-1s in the first place. So sometimes the illness is the cure. You know what I mean?
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay, quick question for you.
Yes.
What snack do you absolutely prevent from entering your house because no dose of GLP-1s could actually hold you back from devouring the whole thing?
Oh, man. Well, my favorite candy by far is an old man candy. It's Almond Joys. When I go to Home Depot, when I'm doing a project, I learned this from my dad. Thanks, Dad. I get one of those every single time I go, and I just tell myself I'm about to go do some work and nail some boards together. This is something I should have. But in general, I'm more of a salty guy. So a good slice of New York style pizza, man. If I have one, it's pretty hard to put it down. But I will say this, GLP-1s are so effective because even that most delicious thing, like when I started GLP-1, I remember there was like a chocolate chip cookie that had just come out of the oven, and it was like, chocolate melting and dripping down on the pan, and just like that most amazing, delicious thing that I would have had like 10 of. And I had 2 bites, and I was like, man, that was good, but I just don't want to eat anymore. And I put it down and I went on with my day. And to me, that is the perfect target, is to say, don't have foods that you can't ever eat.
Yeah.
Have a physiologic structure and balance to where you can have a few bites, really enjoy it, like savor every molecule, and then put it down and go on with your day and expend energy not in trying not to eat the rest, but in doing something else that's way more important, like spending time with your kids, like, being productive at work, going on a vacation, whatever it might be. Don't expend all of your energy trying to not eat, because it's such a dead end for human flourishing. There's more to life than just that.
Amazing. Ladies and gentlemen, you can go check out voafit.com. That's voafit.com and work with Dr. Ellis's team. If you're already on GLP-1s, he has a patent app called My Level that helps you find that optimal range. So if you're on GLP-1s and you're struggling with side effects, you're thinking about, cashing in the chips, don't do it. Go to voafit.com and see what precision dosaging is like, because the future of peptides is so bright, and it really comes down to this personalization because, ultimately it's not one size fits all. It's not like taking an aspirin, it's different and it's anecdotal and it needs to be fit to you like a pair of shoes, and My Level is the tool to do it. Ian, thank you so much for coming on the show. What's the best place for people to connect with you online?
Yeah, so voafit.com is a great place. It has all the links to connect to me by all the other mechanisms, either by phone, by text. I have Facebook and Instagram and, LinkedIn and all the other accounts that should be listed on there in the footer. I will say this directly to any patient that's listening or anyone who's on a GLP-1. If you are following the standard dosing protocol, which starts at a low fixed dose and escalates on a fixed schedule, you are almost certainly taking more medicine than you need, experiencing more side effects than you have to, and optimizing your dose will not result in lower weight loss. It will result in better weight loss over time. Because if you can keep your dose to the minimum effective level, you can do the lifestyle things necessary to make that medicine work for you, not get to the max dose where you're a prisoner of being on 15 milligrams of tirzepatide for the rest of your life. There's a chance that you can taper off and be successful in the long term. So absolutely, give me a call. Go to voafit.com. There's a big book consultation button on there. Initial consultations are free. I would love to talk to you or have someone from my team talk to you about optimizing your regimen, whether it's GLP-1s or hormones or peptides or all the above. That's what we do, and we absolutely love to do it.
Appreciate you, Ian. Thank you so much.
All right. Sounds good, man. I'll talk to you later.
You are about to spend anywhere from $100,000 to $300,000 on your kid's college education, and that's not a small bet. And right now, there's a very real chance that they graduate and can't find a job, not because they weren't smart enough, not because they didn't work hard enough, but because the job market changed and nobody told them. Employers are hiring AI native candidates, people who don't just know their field, but know how to work with AI at a professional level. And most colleges are not teaching this, not even close. AInativestudent.com is the program that fills that gap. It takes high school and college students and teaches them how to actually think and work with AI the way top companies expect on day one, so your investment in their degree actually pays off. You're already paying for tuition, housing, textbooks. This is the one thing that actually makes it all worth it. Go to AInativestudent.com because a diploma is a starting point. Being AI native is what gets them hired. That's AInativestudent.com.